Welcome to the next episode of Drinking into Shape. So in the last episode, we kicked off at the micro level, talking about kind of some of the stuff in the ecosystem, the nuts and bolts of how you get shape spin outs out and what are some of the tools that you need to do it. And we mentioned that we kind of want to look at the slightly bigger picture on the next one. And that's what we're going to do for this episode. We're going to talk about a particular organization that I've been involved with called Aspect. And we're also going to talk about the Accelerator program that I co-founded under Aspect's umbrella, which is, I believe, the first accelerator for shape spin-outs. But before we do all that, prior to Aspect's formation, Mark, I believe you know the kind of origin story of Aspect.
Hang on a minute, forget that. More importantly, what are you drinking today? I am drinking Iqr beer from Bavaria. This is the Keller beer.
Very German, yeah.
Yeah, very German. I don't know why I went for German today. It just felt like that's what was required. Chris, what have you got?
So I've got, you might not be able to see it, but it's called Pillars for Pilsner, which is from East London, specifically an industrial estate in Walthamstow. So there you go.
I'm sure Iqr is made in an industrial estate in Bavaria somewhere. But anyway, you asked me a question, which was, how did Aspect start? Well,
yeah.
So the Aspect is funded under something called the Connecting Capabilities Fund. And the Connecting Capabilities Fund, the call went out, and you were allowed as a university to apply for this fund to put some collaborations together to do something different and new. And as an institution, you were able to apply as the lead institution for one bid and as the supporting institution for a couple of bids. And so 3 bids altogether. And we decided, well, so then the call went out to the business, and then a chap who's an assistant licensing and ventures manager at OUI called Paul Cogswell wrote a one-pager, which is he wanted to use the money to create a translational funding pot for social sciences and humanities. And then he showed it to me, and we then converted that into a 2-pager where I threw in a little bit more about like a program or something like that. To be honest, I can't remember what I put in it, but it was all very much on the licensing and ventures side, that sort of thing, and support to get that going. At the same time, in the Central University, Sam Snedden worked up her own 2-pager, and we sort of did I'll show you mine if I'll show you yours thing, and Sam then combined it into a much longer piece of prose, and hers was incorporated all as well as our bit. It was the knowledge exchange and conferences and all the sort of stuff that was required there. Anyway, then all the various bids came together from all the different bits of the university, and there were umpteen of them, as you'd expect, and the social sciences one came relatively high, but it then started slipping down the pecking order, and it was clear that we weren't able to be the lead bidder on it. So then we started reaching out to other universities to pair up with, and one of whom was London School of Economics. And we, to cut a long story short, we found 3 other bids that we wanted to support, so we couldn't even join it as a supporting bidder. So we had to drop it altogether, but we sort of handed the keys over to somebody called David Coombs in LSE, and he took it on, and it was a mixture of knowledge exchange, technology transfer, all that sort of stuff that applied to social sciences. And then I met him on a course in Leiden at the end of 2017, and he told me about this company called Zinc, which was a spin out that he was getting involved in the bid, and he said this would make things look really different and really interesting. And then I found out that that they'd won the bid, and that they wanted to bring Oxford back in to the partnership, which the council decided that we were allowed to do. And that enabled us to hire somebody else to support social sciences and humanities commercialization. And that's where you came in, Chris. So you got hired in April 2018 as the sort of the aspect person, and you were going to split yourself sort of 50-50 between us and Sam. And you started about sort of April 2018. And then you were thrown right in at the deep end as to what the aspect bid had become. So to be honest, I've read it, but I can't remember exactly what it was. So could you just describe what was the aspect project?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it took me a long time to get my head around it. And I think that partly because I would say no one quite knew exactly what to do at the start. And so there were a lot of meetings at the start where, truthfully, everyone was there and they're like, we've won. And then also like, what are we going to do now? And I just started the job, so I didn't really know what social science and shape commercialization was. So I wasn't really in a position to kind of initially lead on it. So I kind of observed, as you do when you don't know what you're doing. Well, that's one option anyway. But eventually, we started muddling towards a bit of a vision. And the sort of the broad idea, though, that Aspect was trying to do, or how it defined itself, was to really try and get shape commercialization, although initially it was more social science. Shape came a bit later. But it wanted to get shape commercialization closer to where the sciences were. When you listen to the UK government, when you listen to the research councils, when they mean commercialization, most of the time, they mean the sciences. They talk about science startups, they talk about science innovations, they talk about the millions that get invested and the companies that have been created and the employment, science. And that's obviously great. But for the social sciences, clearly recognized, and the arts, that they had to start playing this game as well. That's the currency of the UK government to some extent. And you've got to start saying, look, we can compete on that field as well. And why not? Because actually we're probably going to see some really exciting things. So broadly, Aspect was designed to start sort of leveling the playing field and sort of get social sciences up to speed.
But it was chopped into 3 chunks, wasn't it? So there was, as I recall, there was a bit to set up LSE's tech transfer office because they didn't have one.
That's true.
And so and Auxentia, one of our spin-outs, helped them do that. And there was also the knowledge exchange sort of bit as well, wasn't there? And then there was and this was sharing the learnings of how to commercialize social sciences with the rest of the university network in the UK. And then there was another bit which was Zinc, which is this spin out of LSE.
Yeah.
What does Zinc do? Let's just talk about them first.
Yeah. So you imagine at the start of Aspect, you've got this coalition of, I think it was 7 university partners at the start. So you had LSE, Sussex, Oxford, Glasgow, Manchester, Cardiff, Sheffield, and a couple of others. So this is basically the early partners. But then you had Zinc. And I think actually Zinc were important at the start because you're basically talking about commercialization. You're talking about startups. You're talking about lots of exciting things that the private sector takes for granted. Universities are not historically great at these things or particularly well set up. So you have Zinc, which is basically, I think it was the brainchild of Saul Klein, who's a major tech investor in Europe. And basically the idea was, let's create an accelerator, or sort of actually more kind of incubator accelerator, because it takes them at the very early stages, actually pre-idea. And it's basically like, let's get a bunch of smart people around a challenge, be that homelessness or healthy aging. Let's put them through a program where they get entrepreneurial training, where they get field exposure to the problem that they're kind of solving, and then see if they can coalesce to form ventures around that. And hopefully these ventures, which will be social ventures, will basically, be viable ventures that create products which actually solve problems in these challenge spaces. But the particular catch which made them relevant for Aspect was that they wanted to use social science researchers to help craft either the venture themselves or at least part of the product or service that they were creating. The idea was, there's all these great experts in social science that know how to solve or at least really understand a lot of these problems we have in society and the economy. Let's get them involved, because at the moment they're just kind of, sitting in academia and they don't necessarily have a good way in. If you combine the power and dynamism of a startup with the expertise from social science, maybe you've got something really powerful. And I think that was a compelling part of aspects.
Yeah, it was. And because I'd never heard of them until I met David Coombs in Leiden. And, I went out and found out about them. It was interesting. It's certainly one model of trying to get innovation to happen, isn't it? It was just essentially, long-term hackathons. So that was that aspect. And, if you look at the data and their case studies in terms of being able to put teams together and getting things out, it's successful. Now, so that was that. And I suppose it's also worth saying is that you were also, as well as being, shall we say, thrown in at the deep end with both internal and external politics in the higher education sector in the UK. You were at the same time, I was sort of showing you the ropes of Oxford, and one of the things that was great about you was, I remember taking you to one of those first disclosure meetings with an academic, and for me, when I was going for a disclosure meeting with an academic, it took me a little while to get my head around whatever the social science concept was or the humanities concept, and that's because I'm an engineer, right? I read, I'm keen on the politics and all that sort of stuff, but I've not been trained in that way, so it would always take me a little while to get my head around what it was that they were flogging, But what I noticed with you is that you were picking up the concepts straight away, and so you were sort of getting us right down to the business end of well, what we're going to do with it, almost like within the first half an hour of the meeting, rather than after the third meeting, as was the case with me. So that was great. So you were sort of starting to build up a portfolio within Oxford, and then you were doing this at the same time, and then I suppose there was this. Eventually things moved on, didn't they, with Aspect, and you there was sequential bids that you had to go for a pot, and you sort of, and people were volunteered, well, these are the sorts of projects that I would like to do through a steering group, and you came up with an idea, didn't you, which is because you saw a gap and a need, and so tell me about success.
Yeah, so basically there's a group called the Research Commercialization Group, which was everyone in our line of work, people that basically do licenses and spin-outs, and it was for social sciences at the time. And basically I was kind of somehow in charge of the group, I think because I was the most junior person, so they assumed I had the most time, which was not unreasonable. And I was like, they basically said, look, we've got this money, we've got a deadline, but we've got to spend all this money. Let's think of really good stuff to spend on to advance social science commercialization. And I was just thinking with my Oxford hat on, which was, what are the problems I've got at Oxford at the moment? How can I use this money to solve it? And so my initial idea was actually just to create a small fund that we could basically just fund a few spin-outs from. And we were initially kind of chewing over this idea, everyone in the group. But then actually it was Tony Walker, who's at Manchester.
Oh, yeah.
He said, you know what, why don't we do something, instead of just a fund, why don't we do something a bit more like the Iqr program, but do it for social sciences? And as soon as he said that, everyone just kind of knew that was the right choice. Now, just for those that don't know, the Iqr program's been around for a while, and it's basically a program in the UK to help scientists commercialize. And what happens is you apply for it. If you get taken on, the junior researcher, usually there's a PI, and then a junior researcher basically gets put forward. They get bought out for about 4 months, fully funded, full time. And in that 4 months, they go on an intensive sort of 3-4 day boot camp where they get sort of entrepreneurship 101. And then they basically have to go out and travel the world. This was pre-pandemic, having as many conversations as possible with potential customers of whatever it was, bit of research they were looking to turn into a commercial product. Be like, it could be drug discovery, it could be detection of something, it could be a new type of engine, whatever it was, you go out and you speak to everyone. And at the end of it, you basically hopefully come back with a really viable proposition that you really understand the market that you might sell, then you pitch in front of investors, and hopefully off you go. And they've had some big successes. Thing is, it's totally geared towards scientists. And our idea was that there probably would be a different for social scientists, although we didn't know this for sure. So we said, let's create one using this money from Aspect. let's create a social science accelerator. And that's where Success was born.
Okay, so what did it look like? So you see accelerator programs, and you essentially go through. Typical accelerator program is that you'll do, or incubator program, you'll be doing like business canvases, training, learning how to do accounts, marketing your product, all that sort of stuff. Was that what was in Success? What did you have in there?
So yeah, it did look a lot like that, and initially we were looking to copy a lot of the Iqr structure, because we thought, well, they work with researchers, it's all pretty logical stuff. You have a boot camp, you have market validation, you have a pitch at the end. None of that's unreasonable as a structure, so let's do that. And indeed, we had a couple of people from Iqr. We had some trainers, and we had Don Spanger, who actually kind of created Iqr in the UK.
Oh, I like Don Spanger. Yeah. I think he's fantastic.
with some great stories. And we used Don as a consultant, and we copied that initial structure. So we had, sort of what is an entrepreneur. We had some stuff around cash flow. We had a bit about how to think about your product or market. And it was good. And it kind of got a group of social science researchers together who all had entrepreneurial aspirations. And we threw them together for the first time ever. I don't think any group of social science researchers have ever been thrown together as a collective before. And said, you're all actually on an entrepreneurial journey, and you're going to do this together. And that's how the whole journey began. And so, we took them through that.
So what made it different from Ikea? I mean, did Don say what was different? I mean, what was? Did it just look the same, or the things that you specifically had to do because it was with social scientists?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly started the same, but it actually deviated quite quickly. And perhaps that's not a surprise, but we didn't know that it would deviate that quickly at the start. And so the points of friction were where we started changing things. So one of the first things we kind of came to the conclusion to was, actually, most social scientists don't have initially a sort of product. And actually, a lot of these training camps kind of assume you've almost got like a tech or physical product that you're selling. And they don't. They're often selling, we've talked about this before, more things like consultancy services or expertise. That's one thing. Two, they're often not targeting necessarily investors, or they're not kind of in that kind of tech startup world where they would get investment. And they also target different sectors. They might be going after local authorities to provide social services. They might be looking to work with NGOs or refugees, which is actually completely different markets. Often they're not very commercial markets. So actually a lot of what we assumed didn't necessarily work. And even the language we were using, if we keep telling them, that's, is that a feature, or is that, is you solving a real problem for a customer? The language might be broadly appropriate, but doesn't quite speak to the social scientist journey. And since this was, for many, the very first time they'd even heard of a social scientist being an entrepreneur, if the language is wrong, they often kind of get uncomfortable and feel like it's actually not for them. Yeah, exactly.
So I suppose a lot of the early, what you had to flip right at the beginning was, well, I don't know what language you used, but it was working out what the product actually was. I mean, yes, I mean, it's fair to say that a lot of the social science businesses start as consultancies, but when a consultancy becomes a business is when you consult in the same thing over and over again, and that becomes your product, right? This is the same thing that you do. You sell it to Facebook and Google says, I want one, well, that's, I want an ethics policy, or I want to have a framework for engaging with my local community and all that sort of stuff, and it becomes like this, you consult the same thing all the time. And so was that one of the key things that was different, do you think?
It was a key problem that we found, but we didn't initially know how to deal with it. So we obviously just provided a lot of kind of high touch support as technology transfer officers. But I think the first big change we made from the kind of first iteration that was called Success to the second iteration, which we called ARC, was actually getting rid of bits of the curriculum that simply didn't speak to what the social scientists were doing. And that was probably one of the key changes, because ultimately we wanted the program to feel like it was geared towards them and not geared towards the scientists, and we just happened to be shoving them all in the same room. So that was big. The second part we were trying to do that was difficult at the start was actually get entrepreneurs in who were similar enough that they could then see how this journey could go. And actually there's precious few social science entrepreneurs, but we did get some. We got Jamie from Sophia in Oxford.
Oh, yes.
Great. And we also got Ruth Daniels from In Place of War, which was a University of Manchester spin out, which basically uses kind of engagement in music and the performing arts as a way to kind of help resolve conflict in sort of post-conflict zones, which is a fantastic spin out from basically the arts and music. And so we were really dependent on these two actually to kind of be passionate and sell, like, actually, you social scientists, you arts researchers, you can do this, and we've done it. And one of the big challenges we got, but actually opportunities now, is growing that to show it's not just one or two. There is a community here of people like you that have gone on this journey. Therefore, it's possible.
Yeah, Jamie, I know very well, obviously, because he was my the CEO of my first social enterprise spin out. Yeah, so that was a hell of a journey. But, you know, and I now sit on his the board of his company, and I've been seeing him actually do that process in real time with developing new products from within the business, and it's incredible, you know. And it just, I've learned an awful lot by just seeing him do that. So it's great being able to get these people into help. And I suppose then the question for me would then be, is the community big enough? Do we need more people to come in to help? You know, is it still very niche? Are we still very small, or do you see some, you know, potential for expansion?
The community is very small, there's no doubt about that, and it's virtually non-existent outside of the UK. And I think that's something we found. You know, Mark, you and I both know that there's a few European countries that are really kind of pushing ahead with this, you know, sort of Netherlands, Belgium, Republic, Germany. But that's most of it, actually. And actually outside of that, there's a lot of people starting to look, but very few that have actually got spin outs, the entrepreneurs out the door doing it. So the community is still tiny. What isn't tiny, though, are people experienced in the business models that a lot of them are going to follow.
Yeah.
And the big change we're trying to make with the program is starting to kind of parachute in mentors who have experience of building those kind of business models. Have you taken a consultancy from a one person with an idea up to a 2, up to a 5, and maybe even a 30-person company? And can you help someone go on that journey yourself? And those are the kinds of skills that we're trying to bring in now, rather than just tell everyone you've got to pitch for an investor and implicitly tell them if you don't get the investment, then you haven't succeeded, because that's wrong. We're trying to say, actually, there's different business models, and we're going to try and get you to the people who can help you build that model.
So here's the thing. I mean, one of the I mean, it's been a horrible time for everybody, but one of the benefits of the pandemic was I was contacted by the business school in Oxford pretty early on, actually. I think it was about April. And there were a lot of executive MBAs who were, well, they didn't have anything to do. I mean, they didn't get the Oxford experience because they were locked in their rooms. And forgive me, they weren't just locked in their rooms in Oxford, they were locked in their rooms across the world. They were expected to come to Oxford, and for whatever, and they didn't get here in time, and so they weren't able to have the Oxford experience here, and everything was shut anyway. And so we put together a mentorship program, and this was separate to Aspect and to the programs that you were running. And it was often actually a precursor to some of the projects that were going into ARC. But they were actually really interested in just playing with some of the ideas that were coming out of Oxford and how you could make them into a business, because I'm gonna try and say this as diplomatically as possible. I think that the brains that you're getting in typical business schools are fantastic, and they have to do an entrepreneurship project at some point and build a business from scratch and something like that, or and the biggest problem that they have is that initial idea is not very good. And I found that and it's because they're just not inventors, right? They don't, they're really, what they're really good at, they're passionate, and what they're really interested in is just trying to the mechanics of, like, how do you get these concepts into a product, into a business plan and things like that.
The mindset as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And then chucking them at these Oxford projects that were coming through during the pandemic, they added an immense amount. And do you think, I mean, one of the big issues is, and we discussed it right at the very beginning, is that the nature of the person who typically go to a business school, it's a bit of a put off for the social scientists themselves, and actually trying to get that blind date thing, trying to get the matchmaking done, so that you could get that expertise, but the language is done in the right way. It's actually really tricky part of it, that finding the right mentor for a project to push a project on in that way.
Yes, I mean, I think there's two really big bits there. Like, one is a lot of the academics might never want to actually be the entrepreneur themselves, even if they lead it for a while, because they have to, because it's all locked in their brain, because they're the only person that really understands it. A lot of them, ultimately, it's just not what they want to do. They want to be researchers, and they're already really good at that. So then the question is, where do you get the person who is going to do that if you still want, the business to carry on running or to grow? And I do think there's a really big opportunity there where you basically get the two different skill sets and put them together. And I said mindset because I do think maybe instinctively academics can be quite cautious, and there is a bias to kind of think everything through, be extremely thorough and precise, because if you're publishing research, you're worried about all the ways it could be wrong, and you spend a lot of time really making sure that it is as perfect as it can be given the constraints. But an entrepreneur thinks the opposite way around. It doesn't really matter if it's wrong. It is, like the stereotype, it's can you fail fast enough to get to the right idea before the money runs out?
That's right.
And that's a fantastic attitude to have. And the fact that, anyone in the business school, any business school, just doesn't worry about it going wrong. And they say, let's just do it and find out. You need that.
I do think that you need to get those values matched, though. And I also think that it's slightly easier to do it in Oxford, because Oxford Side Business School makes a thing about focusing on the social entrepreneurship thing, which actually is, brings the business MBAs and the social scientists close together, and occasionally they overlap, and you get the people who have got expertise in business really good at it, and they just then want to make a difference in the world, and Oxford's really good at attracting those sorts of people. And maybe that is maybe it's happening quite across the board. Maybe it's happening in the Haas Business School. I have no idea, right? But a lot of this, when it comes down to a lot of everything, which is what is the key thing that causes a venture to fail right at the beginning. It's not the idea, it's not their access to money, it's a team. If the team fall out with each other, if they can't get on with each other, that's the biggest risk by a long way. And I think these, whether it's what Zinc does, which is putting teams together around a problem, or whether it's putting that's what ARC does, which is I'm putting words in your mouth here, but it's putting teams together around a solution. That's still the riskiest part, isn't it? And so you've done one run of success, you've done one run of ARC, and so what happens next?
So we have funding for 2 more runs of ARC currently. So we're on to ARC, I guess 2.0, which will start next year, and this could be a big change for us. We made a really massive change from success to ARC, but most of that change was about eliminating things that did not fit. And then we added a few in, particularly put more focus on the things that worked. The next iteration, we're thinking of moving to basically swim lanes. So instead of implicitly our last model still kind of was built around this idea that you're creating a startup, and that startup should be investable by the end of the program, or as close to as you can make it. And what we're hoping to do is to recognize that some of them will be startups, but a lot of them will never be startups, certainly not for the kind of foreseeable future that we're operating in. And we want to say, actually, we want to support you on that journey. We still want you to create a business, but if that business is a consultancy that doesn't need investment, that's no problem, and we're going to help you do that. And that means setting slightly different curriculum, like how do you build a consultancy? It means setting different targets. So instead of your target being to gain investment, maybe your target is actually to get your first customer lined up by the end of the program, or at least a pilot customer. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at for the next one. And the thing is we're quite excited by it because we think that that is a much better fit for Shape Ventures. But we actually think that STEM might learn something from this, because it is not true that all STEM projects are startups. And if we can demonstrate that there are other ways to get that STEM research out there, other business models, they might be a minority, they might never be a large number of them. I think that's something that STEM could learn from as well, and that will mean a slightly better fit for scientists who maybe want to do a more consultancy style model, for example.
I like that concept of swim lanes. You know, and this is the thing. This is we've discussed it, you know, over many beers which haven't been recorded, which is you can't control innovation, and there's always this element of trying to put people into programs. It's like you go to an incubator program, and it's a 9-month program, and it's in 3 phases, and it's split into 3 chunks, and it doesn't always fit. You know, things go at their own pace, and a lot of what we do at OUI is geared towards that. It's a one-to-one service, right? Because the projects to progress at their own rate. Sometimes they need to get out in 6 weeks. Sometimes it takes 6 years, and then you sort of or longer. and you know, I've got one that's longer than that. And you 2013, what are we, 8 years now, and it sort of inches along, and then and sometimes the market isn't there. It's always different reasons, or like the academic's busy or something like that. And if you're able to just gear your services and just go, well, go at your own pace. You know, we'll do it, you know, when you're ready, and rather than trying to fit them into this rigid program, then you are going to win. You're going to have more success. And I think that is definitely the case for STEM as well. I mean, because, you know, I'm the sort of person, I'm a person who bridges both. You know, I can compare the two. Well, that's great. I mean, I think that was fantastic. What should we talk about next time? Should we go even bigger next time?
Yeah, I think next time we need to talk about UK level policy to support Shape commercialization. We need to talk about social enterprises. We need to talk about maybe tax policy, how to get investment into them. And what should we do as a country if we want lots more social enterprises, not 5 or 10 from a few universities? What does it look like if we get really big?
And I suppose we're going to have to just remind people why, you know, and what good it could do.
Yeah.
Well, that's next time, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and hope to see you next week.